in foreign ministry. But before we get there, we must understand something of the history of the relationship between the United States and Iran. Because Americans and Iranians remember the same history very differently. In fact, I think if you ask 10 Americans to name the most important date in U.S.-Iran relations, most will say 1979. The revolution, the fall of the Shah, the hostage crisis. For Americans, that's where the story begins. But for many Iranians, it begins decades earlier. In fact, you could argue that it begins in 1906. That was the year of Iran's constitutional revolution, when merchants, clerics, and reformers forced the monarchy to accept a constitution and a parliament. It was one of the first constitutional movements in the Middle East. Iranians were experimenting with representative government long before many of its neighbors ever did. But that early experiment unfolded in a country that was being squeezed by the great powers. In 1907, Britain and Russia divided Iran into spheres of influence. Sovereignty was conditional, and its independence was constrained. Then came 1941. During World War II, Britain and the Soviet Union jointly occupied Iran to secure oil supplies and a supply corridor to the Soviet front. Reza Shah was forced to abdicate. His son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, took the throne. By mid-century, many Iranians already understood something about their geography. They lived in a strategically vital country, and great powers treated Iran accordingly, which set the stage for 1953. Mohammad Mossadegh was elected the prime minister in 1951. He was secular, nationalist, and widely popular. His central issue, which was the issue of the time, was oil. At the time, the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, which was controlled by Britain, extracted Iranian oil under terms that many Iranians considered to be exploitative. Around that same period, Saudi Arabia negotiated a 50-50 profit-sharing agreement with American oil companies. The Saudis received half of the profits from their oil production, and Iranians wanted the same deal. Britain said no. London argued that the Anglo-Iranian structure was different and that post-war financial strain, including massive war debts from World War II, limited its flexibility. To Iranians, that sounded like colonial privilege defended by accounting. So Mossadegh nationalized the oil industry. In Britain, that was seen as theft. Iran saw it as sovereignty. Britain imposed sanctions. It sought international legal remedies. And when those efforts failed, British officials pressed Washington to view Mossadegh through a Cold War lens. Iran bordered the Soviet Union. The fear in Washington was not simply oil, but influence. Instability near Moscow's southern border looked very dangerous in 1953 to America. So the CIA agreed to participate in a covert operation. An operative was sent to Tehran. His name was Kermit Roosevelt III. He was the grandson of President Theodore Roosevelt and the cousin of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He worked with British intelligence. He carried CIA funds to help organize political pressure, propaganda efforts, and street demonstration. The exact amount of money remains debated in historical records, but they were sufficient to mobilize unrest and to influence key actors in Iran. It was called Operation Ajax, and it succeeded. Mossadegh was removed. The Shah returned to full authority. In Washington, it was considered a success of Cold War statecraft. In Iran, it became something else entirely. A defining national trauma, a democratic government overturned with foreign help. For the next 25 years, the Shah ruled as one of America's most important allies. Iran purchased vast quantities of American weaponry. By the 1970s, it was among the largest buyers of U.S. arms in the world. Advanced fighter jets, naval systems, surveillance infrastructure. The relationship was strategic, but it was transactional. Iran bought American arms. The United States treated the Shah as a pillar of regional stability. But political repression deepened. SAVAK, the Shah's security service, suppressed dissent. Rapid modernization widened social gaps in Iran. Oil enriched some and bypassed most. So when the revolution came in 1979, Americans experienced it as this sudden betrayal. But many Iranians experienced it as the delayed consequence of 1953. It's another important date to remember, 1988. During the final months of the Iran-Iraq War, the USS Vincennes shot down an airplane, Iran Air Flight 655. It was a civilian Airbus on a scheduled route flying over the Persian Gulf. All 290 people aboard were killed. The United States described it as a tragic mistake that happened during a tense naval encounter. And that's largely how it's remembered here, if it's remembered at all. In Iran, it's remembered very differently, as civilian lives lost to an American force, as another chapter that reinforced distrust with America. Now, none of this erases what followed. The hostage crisis was real. Iran's support for militant groups is real. Suppression of dissent in Iran is real. Regional destabilization is real. But history doesn't begin where it's most convenient. The United States and Iran are not separated only by policy or only by ideology. They are separated by memory. Americans remember the moment that Iran turned against America. Iranians remember the moment they believed democracy was taken from them. So each nation sees its actions as a response and the others as aggression. And that's the real danger, not simply hostility, but incompatible origin stories. Because when two countries cannot agree on how their conflict began, they cannot agree on how that conflict will end. History, in this case, is not background. History is, in fact, the battlefield.